encountered some of the other famous Hollywood martial artists that are not as authenticated as yourself?
Yeah, I've encountered them, but I dare I say, man, they're not supposed to be. I didn't remember this dude, right? I guess he was a heavyweight. There was a time where, guess I'm fighting my own demons, like I didn't care who was, across from me.
It's never a question about, is he really that tough in real life? Is he really a beater? Can he really hit many people up? There's no question about that because you have the authenticity stamp.
Michael Jai White's opinions shook Hollywood when he named 7 actors he believed were fake fighters, calling out what he saw as martial arts pretenders in the industry. With the calm precision of a man who's been in real combat situations, White made it clear he couldn't stand what he viewed as bullying, bluffing, or posturing in the world of movie martial arts.
I can't stand bully, right? So,
and to me, that was some
Yeah.
You have a guy that's 6'2", probably about 220, muscular, and another guy that's probably about 5'9", probably weighs about 160 pounds.
As a trained fighter with actual championships and real-life experience under his belt, White said he was tired of watching performers convince audiences they were unstoppable warriors when, in his view, they were relying mostly on choreography and camera tricks.
He knew who to punch.
Well, I mean,
It is what it is.
Well, I'm not.
You know who to push, he said, hinting that Hollywood made it easy to tell who trained for real and who trained for the lens. So let's get into it. According to White's commentary, Jean-Claude Van Damme built his whole image on one eye-catching physical ability.
There comes with, dare I say, currency. But the peace of mind is the most thing. What's rich is really like how you living. You know what I mean?
The famous full split, the Volvo commercial showing him suspended between 2 moving trucks, became the symbol of his martial arts credibility. But in White's opinion, the muscles from Brussels persona was more performance than combat power. Van Damme's background included ballet and bodybuilding long before martial arts movies came into the picture. And while those skills helped his on-screen grace, White suggested they didn't translate into real competitive fighting. While White was doing full contact bouts, Van Damme was working on picture-perfect splits and choreographed sequences designed to impress cameras rather than opponents. White pointed out that extreme flexibility can actually be a weakness in real combat. It can sacrifice stability and power.
The law, the street, people know they can sense things.
Mm-hmm.
If you have that victim, if you're this trying to figure out what's going on, hey man, whatever, you're several steps behind.
Van Damme's high kicks looked spectacular on film, but White believed they would leave him wide open against anyone trained in takedowns or counters. From White's perspective, Van Damme moved more like a performer than a true fighter. White also claimed that Van Damme's career depended heavily on careful editing, rehearsed choreography, and hand-picked opponents designed to make him look unbeatable on screen. In his view, that didn't translate to real fighting ability, it translated to movie magic. White emphasized that Van Damme's techniques often looked predictable to practitioners who understood real combat timing and distance. In his perspective, Van Damme was a talented physical performer, but not the warrior Hollywood made him out to be.
That resonated. I'm like, I was driving, just kind of like, shit, I can't let that happen again. But so that's a long, long time ago, but it reinforced the fact that you got to make the mental switch.
The bigger issue, according to White, was how audiences, especially younger fans, mistook on-screen choreography for actual martial arts skill. White believed Hollywood's marketing blurred the lines between cinematic technique and real-world fighting, which could mislead people about what works in real confrontations. Then White turned to Steven Seagal, another actor whose on-screen presence shaped decades of martial arts movies. White said Seagal represented everything he disliked about Hollywood martial arts. A tough guy persona built on carefully controlled conditions rather than real, tested combat skill. White worked with Seagal on several projects and claimed to have seen how the actor maintained his on-screen dominance by choosing situations he could control. According to White, Seagal could be rough with stunt performers who weren't trained to fight back.
Steven Seagal hits a lot of people. That's a unique situation.
Okay, so you did how many Steven Seagal movies?
Like 3?
3.
3 projects with Steven Seagal. 1
Okay.
suit commercial for Nissan and 2 movies.
but became noticeably more cautious when paired with trained martial artists. White explained that Aikido, Seagal's primary martial arts background, is a defensive style focused on movement and redirection, not the high-impact destruction shown in movies. While Aikido has philosophical and technical value, White believed it wasn't built for the kind of high-stress, full-contact situations professional fighters face. He also noted that Aikido training rarely includes resisting opponents or full-force sparring, which made Hollywood portrayals of Seagal defeating multiple attackers at once feel unrealistic to actual fighters. Again, these were White's opinions, rooted in his own combat experience. White also pointed out what he viewed as selective aggression, Seagal seeming tough with people who couldn't retaliate, then becoming respectful with trained fighters. To White, that contrast said everything about the difference between performing power and possessing it. He noted that physical conditioning matters in real fighting. Professionals must treat their bodies like weapons and stay in peak condition. In White's perspective, Seagal's later career conditioning didn't reflect that level of readiness.
Some, like I said, some say it's a badge of honor. Who knows? He might be like, oh, he's not, his understanding. I'll say it that way.
White criticized Aikido demonstrations used to maintain Seagal's mystique, saying they relied on cooperative partners who fell before meaningful force was applied. Against resisting opponents, White believed those techniques wouldn't work the same way. According to White, the industry helped maintain Seagal's tough guy reputation with camera angles, editing, rehearsed moves, and staged encounters that kept his limitations hidden. For someone like White, who earned his reputation through real combat, he said the difference was obvious. Then White addressed Jet Li, another legend whose resume looks incredible on paper. Jet Li is a former Chinese wushu champion, a student of traditional martial arts, and the star of countless kung fu classics. But White emphasized a key distinction in martial arts: competitive performance versus real fighting. In White's eyes, wushu is a beautiful, athletic, performance-based discipline designed for judges and cameras, not.
And so clearly he was a martial artist. And we went back and forth, and everybody in the train is like, listening to me, listening to him, listening to me, listening to him. And so he was, telling me about former, competitions. I was like, oh, you went to the Diamond National?
Not combat. He stressed that Jet Li is a phenomenal athlete and performer, but said that doesn't automatically translate to real-world fighting ability. White argued that movie martial arts and practical fighting are 2 separate worlds, one built for entertainment, one built for survival. Jet Li mastered the former, and White always made sure audiences understood the difference. Wushu, the discipline that helped launch Jet Li into global stardom, was, in Michael Jai White's view, more like martial arts gymnastics than real combat. It was visually stunning, full of acrobatics, elegance, and showmanship.
Tyson hesitated because he's trying to understand the situation. Google that. And Tyson says himself, he says, I hadn't been in fighting in 7 years. He's like, I was scared.
But White believed it didn't mirror the gritty reality of fighting at all. According to White's perspective, wushu routines were judged on beauty, timing, and athletic flow, not practical damage, force, or the adaptability needed in an actual fight. Jet Li trained for movements that scored points with judges, not movements designed to stop a determined opponent swinging back at full force. On film, Jet Li's fights were breathtaking, fast, fluid, almost artistic. But as White explained it, the fights were structured like dances, with opponents required to attack along pre-planned lines so Li's counters could land perfectly. In real combat, nobody cooperates with your timing or waits while you spin into a perfect stance.
I can directly use your hands. If you palm like this into somebody's face, you can hit them in the nose, eyes, and everything. If you did that blindly, I'm going to hit something, right? And dash the out, that's your best situation.
White believed the physical demands of wushu actually boxed Li into a performance style, prioritizing flexibility and visual speed over power, pressure, or tactical instincts. Real fighting demanded the ability to generate force, take hits, and respond instantly to chaos, not follow a choreography checklist. White often said Li's movie success created a huge misunderstanding about traditional Chinese martial arts among fans. Viewers thought they were watching authentic kung fu strategy, but White insisted they were seeing performance art built for entertainment, not survival. This, he felt, led many people to expect techniques that simply wouldn't hold up under real pressure. To White, Jet Li's lack of full contact combat experience showed in his movements, his distancing, his defensive reactions, his footwork. He moved like someone who had never been blasted by a heavy shot, never been rocked, never had to adapt to a resisting opponent intent on doing damage.
There was a book by a guy named Matthew Polly, Bruce Lee, A Life, where he talked about the whole stuntman thing, about how stuntmen hated Bruce on Green Hornet.
Green Hornet?
Yeah, and that's why they brought in a guy named Gene LaBelle to teach Bruce respect for Americans.
His techniques were clean and gorgeous, but in White's view, they lacked the raw efficiency real fighters develop. Even Lee's legendary speed, White argued, was a cinematic illusion when viewed through a combat lens. Wushu speed is continuous and flowing. Beautiful, yes, but not optimized for the explosive timing needed to land meaningful strikes under pressure. Real fighting speed isn't fast. It's right time fast, White liked to say. Jet Li's reputation as a martial arts icon, according to White's commentary, was built mostly on demonstrations and cinema, not competitive victories or documented fights against peers who were allowed to hit back. His martial arts knowledge was deep, but in White's view, leaned theoretical rather than pressure-tested. White often said the real tragedy was that Jet Li absolutely had the athletic gifts to become a legitimate fighter. He just never trained for that arena. Instead, his abilities were funneled into performance work that created expectations about martial arts that didn't necessarily match reality for self-defense or competitive combat.
That picture with me deeply. Because that picture got plastered on everything. It was like on the front of everything. And it hurt me to the soul. Just hurt me to the soul, man. It really bugged me.
Then came the most controversial take of all, Michael Jai White touching on Bruce Lee, the most sacred name in martial arts cinema. Criticizing Bruce Lee is martial arts blasphemy, but White framed his comments as honest technical analysis, not personal attack. Bruce Lee's impact on culture is undeniable. Movies, philosophy, training methods, everything. But White stressed that Lee's fighting reputation grew largely from stories, not from verifiable competitive bouts. According to White's critique, Bruce's legacy came from demonstrations, philosophy, and film, not from full-contact championships or documented fights against elite opponents. Bruce's system, Jeet Kune Do, was revolutionary in concept, but, as White pointed out, it was never tested under modern competitive pressure where outcomes are recorded and opponents resist with full intensity. Many of Bruce's most famous feats, like the one-inch punch, were impressive demos, but, in White's opinion, didn't prove real fight readiness on their own. White always acknowledged Bruce's conditioning, discipline, and physical brilliance. Nobody denied that. But, he argued, physical gifts don't automatically make someone a proven fighter. Plenty of bodybuilders look like Greek statues but struggle in real combat because fighting requires specific skill sets built through resisting opponents. White believed Hollywood and early martial arts marketing created a powerful mythology around Bruce Lee. Stories of unmatched speed, supernatural reflexes, and unbeatable skill. Those stories became accepted as fact, even though most came from admirers, not verified competition results. To Michael Jai White, none of this erased Bruce Lee's importance. He consistently said Bruce was a pioneer whose cultural influence was untouchable. But
I had to make that switch. I was busy trying to figure out what his beef was or what he was saying to me. But that resonated. I'm like, I was driving, just kind of like, I can't let that happen again.
he also believed people should understand the difference between cinematic martial arts and real combat, and he wasn't afraid to say it loudly. The few bits of sparring footage connected to Bruce Lee showed him working with partners who, in Michael Jai White's opinion, looked cooperative rather than competitive. White believed Lee's influence on martial arts philosophy was powerful, but warned that people often mixed up theoretical insight with proven fighting ability. Lee's writings were sharp, creative, and ahead of their time, but White felt they reflected intellectual understanding rather than years of full-contact, high-risk competition. White noted that many martial arts teachers can explain brilliant theories but still struggle to apply them under real pressure. And he often pointed out something fans rarely discussed: Bruce Lee's size. At roughly 135 pounds, White believed Lee would have faced serious disadvantages against larger trained opponents no matter how skilled he was. Weight classes exist for a reason, and White insisted technique alone doesn't erase physics. White knew questioning Bruce Lee's fighting ability was controversial, but he always said honesty demanded separating demonstrated skill from assumed legend. He respected Bruce Lee's influence deeply, his philosophy, his cultural impact, his contributions to martial arts awareness. But White believed those achievements shouldn't be confused with documented combat effectiveness against elite rivals. The heartbreak of the Bruce Lee mythology, according to White, was that it gave generations of young martial arts students unrealistic expectations about what training could do. They believed they could reach Bruce Lee levels through repetition alone, not realizing the legend was shaped heavily by storytelling, admiration, and marketing, rather than competitive records. When reality didn't match the myth, disappointment hit hard. Then White turned his attention to Frank Dux, the most extreme example, in his opinion, of martial arts storytelling gone too far. Dux inspired Bloodsport, a cult classic, but White believed the real-life claims surrounding him were riddled with contradictions. To White, Dux became a case study in how easily people could be pulled into dramatic tales simply because they sounded exciting. The legendary Kumite tournament at the center of Dux's story had no verifiable documentation, no footage, no credible reports, no confirmed participants, nothing. Dux claimed to be the undefeated champion of this underground combat circuit, but White and many others noted that even basic evidence was missing. Real underground fights existed, White said, but nothing like the globe-spanning tournament described in Dux's stories. White also believed Dux's alleged fight record defied basic logic. He claimed hundreds of matches and supernatural win rates, numbers far beyond what even the most active real fighters accomplished. In legitimate combat sports, someone with 50 professional bouts is considered extremely active, yet Dux claimed 6 times that number, with results no documented fighter in history had ever matched. When investigators examined Dux's supposed military background, critics argued that the records didn't support his dramatic claims. Reports of CIA missions and covert operations were also widely doubted by researchers who looked for proof and found none. According to White, the gaps in evidence were too large to ignore. When analyzing Dux's demonstrations, White saw someone with basic karate foundations, but not the kind of refined, battle-tested skill expected from a world-class fighter. His kata looked practiced, but his sparring seemed limited, like someone who learned from books rather than years of pressure training. To White, his movement didn't match the claims about impossible strength or endurance feats. White pointed out that real elite athletes want their abilities tested and verified. They want cameras, judges, and witnesses. But Dux never submitted to controlled testing for any of his extreme physical claims, which made White even more skeptical. Throughout his career, White said he had run into many Frank Dux types, people who inflated their stories to impress beginners. He believed these individuals were dangerous because their false confidence encouraged students to trust techniques that might fail brutally in real confrontations. The fallout of Dux's myth-making, in White's view, stretched far beyond one man. It influenced martial arts culture itself, creating unrealistic expectations about self-defense and tempting others to exaggerate their credentials. The ripple effects lasted decades and made White even more passionate about calling out what he saw as misinformation. Then White addressed a shocking topic: his criticism of certain Shaolin performers. White emphasized that his critique wasn't aimed at authentic traditional Shaolin training, but at what he saw as a modern tourist version of the temple system. He believed commercialization had turned parts of it into a show, flashy performances for paying visitors rather than genuine martial arts education. In White's view, the modern Shaolin temple functioned more like an entertainment attraction than a strict training institution. Visitors paid high prices to watch dramatic demonstrations, board breaking, choreographed routines, acrobatics, all carefully staged for spectacle rather than actual martial arts combat effectiveness. And according to White, many performers weren't monks at all, but hired athletes portraying the Shaolin image for tourists. White felt that while these shows were visually impressive, they misled audiences into thinking they were witnessing ancient combat secrets rather than theatrical demonstrations. To him, this was another example of how commercial presentation could distort the public's understanding of real martial arts. Michael Jai White believed that many modern Shaolin-style demonstrations were more performance than authentic training, even though he fully respected the historical Shaolin tradition. In his view, real Shaolin monks of the past were warrior scholars, fighters who spent years building real martial skill through discipline and practical application. But White argued that today's commercialized versions leaned more toward tourism than combat. According to White, the breaking demos that wowed wow tourists, smashing boards, bricks, and concrete, looked incredible, but didn't prove anything about real fighting ability. Those feats took conditioning and technique, sure, but White stressed they didn't connect to the kind of skills needed against an actual opponent throwing live strikes. White also believed that many modern programs exaggerated the mystical elements of Shaolin culture to attract visitors and spiritual thrill seekers. Claims about internal energy, miracle pressure points, or supernatural feats were presented to audiences who wanted to believe in dramatic shortcuts instead of training. To White, that distracted from the genuine, practical parts of martial arts training. White said he'd met plenty of students who trained in modern Shaolin-style programs, students who could perform beautiful forms with incredible flexibility, but struggled against resisting opponents. Their movements looked great for audiences, but White felt they didn't translate to real-time combat where timing, pressure, and adaptability mattered most. From White's perspective, the business model behind these programs said everything. Real martial arts schools take years to build real fighters, while commercialized Shaolin-style programs often promised quick mastery or secret knowledge in short sessions. White believed that model focused on revenue, not authentic training. To him, the cultural cost was even bigger. White felt these commercial versions overshadowed the authentic practitioners who had preserved historical methods. Instead of honoring tradition, the spectacle diluted it, turning sacred practices into stage shows and ancient wisdom into marketing slogans. Then White shifted to something he truly hated: manufactured martial arts entertainment, with Bully Beatdown being his prime example. The show claimed to help victims confront bullies by having the bullies face professional fighters, but White believed the entire setup was entertainment dressed up as intervention. White argued, real bullying is a complex emotional and social problem, not something solved through a TV bout or public humiliation. He felt the show sold the idea that punching someone was a legitimate solution to bullying, a message he found especially dangerous for young viewers who might try to imitate it. White also believed the casting wasn't authentic. Real bullies wouldn't volunteer to get punched by professional fighters on national television, and real victims wouldn't want their trauma broadcast for ratings. To him, the show picked people based on entertainment value, not genuine need. The confrontations, White said, were staged for drama. Fighters were told to keep things safe, to protect participants, meaning the bully beatdown was mostly smoke and mirrors. The bullies didn't face real consequences, and the victims didn't get meaningful resolution. It was a cycle of pretend conflict and pretend justice. White had strong opinions about the show's host too, saying he didn't believe the host had the expertise needed to address bullying or provide real martial arts education. From White's perspective, the show served entertainment, not the people involved, and the shallow treatment of serious emotional issues did more harm than good. The self-defense demonstrations on the show also concerned White. In his view, quick TV segments showing complex moves without explaining safety, legal considerations, or real-life context could be dangerous. Someone trying a half-understood technique in a real confrontation could get seriously hurt or hurt someone else. White believes shows like Bully Beatdown damaged the reputation of legitimate martial arts programs that focused on discipline, safety, and real education. They turned serious issues into spectacle, traded social responsibility for ratings, and gave viewers the illusion of solutions that solved nothing. To White, the biggest tragedy was the missed opportunity. Instead of teaching conflict resolution, emotional intelligence, or real self-defense strategies, the show offered staged catharsis through TV action. It looked like empowerment but delivered no real help, and in White's eyes, that was the ultimate deception. Anyway, that's the end of the video, folks. Catch you in the next one.